Welcome to Controlled Chaos. My name is Shana. I'm your host today, and I'm here with Sarahya. Can you tell us a
Hi.
little bit about yourself?
Well, my name's Sarahya, obviously. I'm 34. I'm a mother of two, an 11-year-old little boy and an 8-year-old little girl. And I am a recovering addict, 21 months clean and sober from crack meth and fentanyl. And I'm a widow. I lost my husband um, to our addiction.
Okay, so you're actually one of the first people that I've had on who really had much to do with fentanyl and stuff like that. So I'm going to have all the questions because it's not my, place of expertise. So tell me, just how did your drug use start? Like, what started it?
So, bizarre enough, I actually didn't try my first drug really until I was 27 years old.
Oh my
Um,
goodness. So only had kind of like drank and stuff like that.
yeah, mainly just like alcohol. And I wasn't even like a big drinker, like maybe go out every once in a while and have a few shots because I hated the taste of alcohol. And then it was just like, whatever. I didn't understand addiction. So I was very arrogant. Like I just don't have that in me, and almost look down on addicts. Like, my dad, he is a homeless drug addict, but my mom had taken us away from that when we were very little and raised us in church. And so I was very sheltered and stuff. And then I got with my husband, who was a wild man.
Okay, so no kids, no nothing, really didn't drink. You
Nope.
had kind of grown up in church and kind of were like, what's a drug addict? How would they do that? And you
Yeah.
meet your husband and
Yep.
what happened? How did you get introduced to drugs?
So I noticed like some things that seemed off to me, but because I wasn't used to addicts, I didn't like put two and two together for quite a while. But I kept finding like broken pins all around our house and like foil and stuff. And I was like, what is this? Like, so weird. And
Pins
I
like head?
like a pin that you would write with, but like hollowed out, like it had been snapped, like a tutor.
Oh, okay.
But I just
Okay.
didn't know it was a tutor at the time.
Right. So
And
you're just like, what's going on?
yeah. And so I actually ended up asking a friend of mine. I was like, hey, like, what is this? And he was like, oh, yeah, your man's smoking pills. I was like, what?
So
And
you
then,
guys were already living together and you like
yeah,
find out that he's smoking pills. And how did you
yeah,
feel about that? Were you like, what the hell? What did you say?
yeah. I literally, like, I confronted him on it and he was like, yeah, I've struggled with addiction, since I was 18. But I'm like, now I'm clean. I'm on something called Suboxone and like I'm better or whatever. And so I told him, okay, but if you like mess with that stuff again, I'm gonna have to walk away. And he
Mhm.
was like, okay, I promise I won't, and stuff like that. And then I found out I was pregnant.
Okay. So how did you, and when I ask questions, I'm not asking it like, oh, how did you do that? Just like
No, yeah, for
thought
sure.
process, right? So like
Yeah.
when you found the stuff, he was like smoking pills, obviously, or whatever. And he tells you like, yeah, I had a problem, but I'm sober now. How does being sober correlate to like the stuff that was all around? Because like clearly he wasn't sober, right?
Yeah, but because I had like literally no exposure to that. So I was raised apostolic Pentecostal. So I was
Mhm.
raised very no TVs, no like we didn't cut our hair, we didn't wear makeup, we didn't wear jewelry, like
So
only
he was just
skirts.
like, I'm done. And you were like, okay, cool.
Yes.
Moving
So
on.
I had no like knowledge of like the world, quote unquote. And so
Mhm.
I was just like, okay, yeah, he's clean. Like, this is great. He was not
Right.
clean.
Okay. So you find out you're pregnant and
Yes.
what happened then?
Um, and then he dives back into very obvious addiction, like hardcore. And we're living in this apartment, like we don't have a vehicle at the time, nothing. Like we're just two like broke kids trying to like make it. You know, I was being a night stalker at Walmart. He was working at Rosar's. Like we were just poor, like little kids, you know, who were like, we're bringing a baby in the world. And it obviously, I don't believe he had ever stopped his addiction, but it definitely spiraled him deeper into his addiction when he realized, like, I'm going to be a dad. Like, that was his go-to, you know?
Right. So you guys were living in this apartment, you guys are both working, and you were pregnant. So how did your pregnancy go? Like, was it bad? Was the relationship good? Like, how was it?
It was hell. It was hell for sure. Um, I it was exhausting. I was running around trying to save him. Um, and yeah, it was hell. It was the worst. Like, it was the worst pregnancy I had, for sure, hands down.
So like when you say that you were trying to save him, what does that mean? Because I definitely know what that consists
Yeah.
of. But for people who don't understand kind of what it's like to live with a drug addict, and also you and I understand like somebody, you know, trying to get clean, they're doing way less than they were before. Maybe they're even making it like every other day. They really are trying, right? So in their head, they're, and maybe not even in their head, in real life compared to a lot of other times in their life, right? They're doing better, right?
Yeah.
So when he met you before you were pregnant, he was kind of doing a little bit better and able to like hold things together. And when you found out you were pregnant, it was kind of like spiraling. So things kind of got bad. So what did that look like? Like having to go save him from things?
So a lot of times it looked like me sitting at home alone, like sometimes for days on end with no phone, no way to contact him, like just like hoping he would show back up. Driving or like getting a friend to come get me and driving around and looking for him, like at all hours of the night. Where is he? Like, is he okay? It was a lot of like pacing, you know, and just like anxiety, I guess you could say, like the worst anxiety you can ever have, like to the max, like never knowing, like, is he alive? Is he in a ditch somewhere? Like, is he okay? And then him just popping back up like it was nothing and like frolicking back into our apartment, sleeping for a few days and back at it again.
Right. So when he came home, he would kind of like sleep things off and then you guys try to be just a regular couple again?
Yeah, it would be like a cycle, you know, he'd come back, we'd play house again, and then something would trigger him and he'd be right back out. And that happened until that happened until June of 2011. We had our son August 18th, but in June of 2011, his father, his whole family, all the men in the family are in the union, the carpenters union. And so over here in Western Washington, we were living in Eastern Washington in Spokane at the time. And his parents were like, why don't you guys move over here to Western Washington, back where he was raised and all his family was. We'll get him in the union. It's great pay, great benefits and stuff like that, and get his life on track. So we did that. He got in, he got accepted. We moved to his parents' property. They ended up building a little apartment for us above their garage and stuff, getting everything ready for the baby. And he got his life on track and he was doing awesome.
So at this point, you still had never used anything yet?
No, nothing.
Okay. So things are going good. You have the baby. Then what?
Yes. So we moved there. Everything's going great. We get married July 28th of 2011. And then little Dan, our boy, he comes August 18th. And Dan he wasn't high, but he was wasted in the delivery room because he had been in his uncle's getting drunk because where we lived, it's called House Hill, and it's like a compound almost for his whole family. So, and everybody on that hill struggles from some type of substance, whether it's alcoholism or drug addiction. And so he was down there when my water broke, having a good old time with family.
Okay.
And then we have to deliver the baby. And he sees his son and he's like in love immediately. You can tell, like he's holding his boy and like bawling his eyes out. And he shapes up for like a year. Dan does awesome, like beautifully, and is an amazing father. And like me and him still butt heads off and on, but for the most part, he's great. Provider, he's working, everything's awesome. And then he just like reconnects with some buddies that he hadn't seen in quite a few years, high school buddies. And so Dan's drug of choice was pills, like Percocets, Oxys. He got involved in the drug scene in the early 2000s. I believe it was like 2004, 2006, when the Oxy 80s were a huge boom. And they were pushing pain clinics and stuff. He'd gotten a football injury at 18 years old and tore his ACL and had to get surgery. And the doctor gave him a script for, I think it was almost 2 months for Oxys. And by the time they pulled him, he was fully addicted. Right. And so that was always his drug of choice. And so he had started pills. And that was my first interaction with, I guess I could say that was my first interaction. So it wasn't necessarily 27 when I first tried something. It was 27 when my addiction hit. But he ended up asking me one night, do you want to smoke a Percocet? I'll show you how to. And I was like, okay, whatever. And so I tried it and I hated it. I was like, what in the heck? Like, why would you do this? Like, this makes me tired. Like, I can't keep my eyes open. This is not fun. This is not a party drug. Right. I didn't like it. But I couldn't understand. Like, I was like, even then, I still didn't understand addiction because I was like, how come I can stop and you spiral into like a 3-month bender? Like, I can smoke like a half of one and be like, ew, I don't want it. And it not bother me at all. But you are like going off the deep end looking for heroin now. Like, I don't understand that, you know?
Right.
And so he struggled off and on with that after that first year, after our son turned 1. After that, he struggled. He would get clean. That was like Dan's pattern: get clean, stay clean for 6 months, sometimes a year, relapse, stay clean, like a wash, rinse, repeat cycle, you know, over and over and over again.
Right.
And then I found out I was pregnant with our daughter in 2014. And he spiraled again into a heroin addiction.
So how did he like go from heroin to pills? Is it because it just wasn't available to him anymore?
Yeah. So it was started getting harder in our area to get the oxys because he would want oxy 30s or oxy 80s or whatever. And I think by that time, oxy 80s had pretty much like run their course. They were like a tale of the past, you know, at that time. Like, it was very rare to find that, if ever. And the oxy 30s, they were going for like $30 a pill, which we made good money, but that was still a lot, you know, especially with his tolerance.
So a lot of times, I just want to stop and say this, and you'll be able to say too, but a lot of times people don't understand how people end up in hard drugs, and they're like, well, why would you ever do heroin? Why would you ever do meth? And the truth is that 99.9% of the time, it starts at your doctor's office.
Yeah.
I don't have the money to keep up with what has happened. So It's just like being an alcoholic, right? Except for as an alcoholic, I was free to just go to the store, right?
Yeah.
I didn't have to go pay $30 or $40 for a pill that I used to be prescribed, right? Yeah. Like, a lot of people don't understand that like the closest next thing is just heroin, meth, whatever, right? Because you can't afford
cheap, like dirt cheap, you know? So it's like, well.
Yes. Okay. So go ahead.
I would also like to add that, so Dan was he was self-medicating, not only from what he had been prescribed from that injury, but I found out later on that my husband was sexually abused as a child for years, brutally. And he'd never told anybody. I was the first person he told. And he carried around massive shame that wasn't his to carry. And I think when that doctor gave him that script, he realized all that's gone. My pain's gone. You know, the memory of that, it's numb now. Like I can function. And I think if I could say anything, it's pain that killed Daniel.
Yeah.
Like a unresolved pain, you know.
Yeah. And I think that what a lot of people don't realize is a lot of times drug addiction, alcoholism, it is all fueled by trauma, right?
Yeah.
It's like
100%.
all of a sudden you that in your system and everything is quiet, right?
Mhm.
For the first time. You don't feel like you're going crazy, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that's what, you know, how it happened for him. And then I realized that that's what happened because when I fell into addiction, I had been abused as well by my step grandfather for many years.
Mm-hmm.
And I also got that silence where I was like, it's gone. Like, I don't have, like, that feeling's gone, woo, you know, which it's not, obviously.
But it gives you like a reprieve, right? Like a break.
Yes, well, like a relief, like you can breathe finally, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so Dan fell into heroin and then I left him when I was 6 months pregnant because I was once again doing what I had did when I was pregnant with my son. I was chasing him around everywhere. I had been honestly off and on for the 2.5 years prior. And like so much so that my son actually, like that mother child bond that you get from when the babies are very young, my son actually got that from my mother-in-law and not me. So he would cry whenever he would cry, get hurt, he would cry for my husband's mom, not me.
Right.
Because I was so, even still at that point, I was so in love with Daniel and just like, I got to save him, you know, and he's like everything to me. And like he was
were you
only
sober at this time, like while you were pregnant?
Excuse me, what?
Were you sober while you were pregnant with your
Yes.
daughter? Okay, so
Yes.
you were sober and chasing him around?
Yeah. I was sober chasing him around and I'd found him in like a local like dope house, doped in. And I remember I walked in, I was 6 months pregnant and I busted in there and I distinctly remember it was so dark in there. They had the windows closed up and there was piles of kids' toys and clothes everywhere. And there were addicts just strung out all over the place, just laying around. And I remember like looking at it and being like, this is off. There's no kids here. Like, why is there kids' toys and kids' clothes and stuff everywhere? And I walked back into a back room and my husband was smoking heroin in the closet with a girl from high school that was shooting up right next to him. And I literally pretty much dragged him out of there.
Right.
And was like, no, like, you're coming home. Like, we're going to get you better or whatever. He came home and he played the part and he started telling me that he was going to meetings. I'm going to meetings. And he would leave at night for a couple hours and then he'd come back. But I would be like, it always seemed like he was high when he would come back. And I was like, So I followed him one day and I followed him and he was meeting a dealer is what he was doing and getting high for a couple hours and then coming home and saying he had went to meetings. And so I left. I was like, I'm done. When you want to have a family and you want to get clean, let me know. And I drove the 7 hours back to Spokane, to where my mom was. And I stayed with my mom. It took about a week and a half. And then he called me and he was like, I want my family back. This isn't what I want. I'll do whatever. I'll go to treatment. I'll get help. Whatever you want, whatever you say, I'll do. And he was like, I don't really want to go to treatment because I need to provide for my family and I need to keep working. But if you want me to, I will. So at that time, I had looked into the Suboxone program and I was like, okay, he can get on Suboxone through a doctor where he's not buying it off of an addict off the streets like he was before. You know, if we get him on this Suboxone program, he'll be drug tested and maybe it'll help him. And so about 2 weeks before our daughter was born July 11th of 2015, he got on the Suboxone program. And it was like night and day. I will say that I'm a complete advocate for those programs if you work them correctly, because it truly saved Daniel's life at that time. It saved our marriage, everything. And he got on the program. He followed his doctor's orders. He was doing nothing else, just his Suboxone. And he started, like, I had never really met Daniel. And to this day, I don't think I really did either, because he was on Suboxone. But I think, the closest that I was ever going to see to who Dan was at his core, you know? And I liked him. So it was awesome, you know, and he was a great dad and, like, phenomenal dad. He coached our kids' sports teams. He was awesome. And then in 2017, it was Thanksgiving of 2017, actually, we had bought a house. We were doing great. And we invited everybody over to our home. And we hosted the family Thanksgiving there. Well, my kids were out of town. They were at my mom's in Spokane for that whole week. She had taken them. And so we were there just having a good time, you know, having drinks, hanging out with family. And my brother-in-law had showed up, and my brother-in-law is pretty much a lifer addict as well. He's my husband's older brother, and extremely, extremely, like, steeped in addiction.
Right.
And he had brought methamphetamine to my house on Thanksgiving, and I had never seen it before. Like, Dan hated downer or uppers, and so it wasn't something he ever brought around, or I had no idea. But I had found the baggie in our bathroom, and I freaked out. I lost it. I was like, "What are you doing, bringing this into my home?" and stuff like that. Right. Well, about 4 other family members, they were like, "Hey, come here. Have you ever tried it?" I was like, "No." And they were like, "You should. It's kind of like, just like, you know, you've heard about Coke. It's just like a more extreme Coke, kind of." And I remember I mulled over it, and I was like, and Dan and all them, Dan was like, "I'm not an uppers guy. I won't fall. I promise. Like, I can, like, how you could do a pill and not touch it again. I can do this and not touch it again. It's just a fun party drug." So me, my little sister,
one time type of deal thing.
Yeah. And so me and my little sister and another brother and sister-in-law and Dan all snorted a line of meth. And I stayed up for 3 days, and I loved it. And I realized that I'm an idiot and that just because you don't get addicted to one substance, there's a lot more out there. And maybe that's downers aren't your drug of choice, Sarahya. Maybe it's uppers. And it was, and thus began my spiral into full-blown addiction.
Okay, so what did that look like? From that day on, you used meth?
Yeah, I became Dan in a woman's body, pretty much.
And was also, or?
No, he was not. He every once in a while, he would, like, maybe pop an Adderall or something, but for the most part, he was trying to stay on his, like, Suboxone. He was fighting for the first time. He was trying to stay clean and stuff like that. And he was begging me, like, "This is disgusting." Because you know how there's, like, stigmas, even with addicts, like, heroin addicts look down on this, like, addict and a meth addict looks down on this one. So he was like, "Ew, that's, like, the grossest addiction you can have. This is sick. Like, you need to get off of it," and stuff. And so I would go behind his back and lie to him and go to my brother-in-law and buy from my brother-in-law and have him, like, get me whatever, you know, and use it and not tell Daniel. But Daniel wasn't an idiot. He'd be like, "I can tell you're, like, off." And I'd be like, "No, like, it's my weight loss pills. It's not that."
Right.
And so I still at that point wasn't an everyday user. It was like every weekend and maybe a couple days during the week, but I would never use during the day. So I justified it. It's fine because I don't use during the day. I take care of my responsibilities. And then at night I use. And, yeah, you know how that goes. It just like spiraled, and got progressively worse, for about 2 years. And then in 2019, we had a very traumatic event happen, and it shook me to my core. And I was like, we have to get into church. We have to go to church and change our lives completely. Like, we can't live like this anymore. And 2 days later, we went to church, and the same type of church I grew up in. So it was like from one extreme to the very next extreme again, and we did good. We immersed ourselves in that. We were clean. He was still on Suboxone, but other than that, we were clean. We had our kids in the private school there. We ended up buying like a bigger, more beautiful house. I was working, ironically enough, for a long CPS. So I was a family time visitation supervisor. So I would pick the children up who were in foster care and bring them on the visits with their biological parents, write reports. I'd offer like treatment options to the parents, drive the moms to treatment, stuff like that. I loved it. It was a great job. We were making good money. We were traveling out of the country every year, going to Mexico or wherever else, family vacations and stuff, doing really good. And then in October of 2021, my husband's brother introduced him to fentanyl. And it's so hard to put into words, because I explained how Daniel had like struggled, and I watched him like in the throes of addiction before, but I had never, ever seen something grab a hold of my husband so quickly. Right. And we literally just wreck, complete mayhem.
So here is my question with fentanyl, because you hear about like people taking pills and it's like laced with fentanyl and they die. But then some people say that they're addicted to fentanyl. So what is it that like there's like a certain amount you can take, or how does that work?
I do not know. Like, I can't honestly say, because his brother, we were, so the very first thing that Dan ever tried, they were called dirty 30s or blues. And they were, they looked like fake Percocet, like literally just like a Perc 30. And they, you never knew like how much you never knew until you took that first hit, smoked that first line of it off of the foil, to know how strong that pill was going to be. Because all of them, they're
super scary.
No, because at that point, so in 2011, when I'd first, 2 months after I'd met Dan, my grandfather actually died from a fentanyl overdose, but it was from the patches that his doctor had given him. And he had put, my grandpa was an addict and a pill addict, like a doctor supplied him with all of his addiction, and he was trying to get off of it. And for whatever reason, they had given him fentanyl patches to help him get off of the pills. And it was like, of course he's going to abuse it. He's an addict. My grandfather put 300 milligram patches on his body, and he died in his sleep. But that was pretty much and when I was pregnant with my daughter, I was given fentanyl through labor, through an IV. But that was my only really like exposure to it. So at that time, I didn't really I hadn't paid attention to all the deaths. I wasn't really even aware, honestly, of what actually was going on and how much of an epidemic it was. Yeah, I was just like, kind of like, oh, it's just another pill. Like, it's just like heroin or another thing that he's getting addicted to. And until I tried it. And then I was like, holy, like, shit, for lack of a better word. Because I hated downers, and it literally like full on addiction from the very first pill as well.
So the first time you used it, you started just using it from then on.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Him and me both. I still didn't, I was using fentanyl and meth together.
Mm-hmm.
So I would do like fentanyl, and then take, like, if I got too knotted out, I'd take meth again, to wake myself up, take some hits of meth or whatever. And for 10 months, we were on that spiral. It was a spiral. We would like, we would sabotage each other's sobriety a lot. Like if one of us was trying to get clean and pull out of it, the other one would be like 3 days in, we'd be like, we're going to go back anyways here and just bring the other one like drugs, just relapse. It's not even worth it, like sabotage. Cause either I wanted to get high and if he was getting clean, that hindered my high, obviously, which is disgusting and something that I will carry with me forever, I imagine. But
It's okay. It's not easy. Hey.
and in that 10 months, we lost everything. We lost our home. Dan was barely working. He was in and out of work. Like, thankfully, he was in the union and he was vested and journeyed out. So he had a way more leniency than me. But I was like, there's no way I can work. I'm working with addicts. Like,
right.
I can't do this. I can't hold down my job and do this. And so we ended up moving back to Elma in May of 2022. And that's where Dan grew up. And that's where it was the worst mistake of our life. And he was smoking 30 to 40 pills a day. We were waking up every 30 minutes throughout the night to take a hit and pass back out, like all night long. Never slept a full night.
And did you guys still had your kids with you?
Oh yeah, we still had our kids with us. So I think like the only reason why we were able to keep our kids is because I would only use at night. I didn't like getting high during the day, really. I was like, maybe on the weekends, like every once in a while, but I would keep it for the most part at night. And I was probably smoking maybe 3 pills max a day. And I was doing meth also. So I was up, I was able to function, I wasn't like nodding out and comatose like my husband was.
Right.
And so and because we'd been very functioning addicts for years, like nobody honestly really knew the depths of our addiction until it was too late. Like I don't know how to like even explain it, but you can like be the suburban like house mom and be completely strung out and nobody know. Like, and we did it beautifully, honestly. Like nobody really knew. We were just looked at as Dan and Sarahya, the fun party crowd, like the fun party couple. Like they're such a good time when we get around them. And Dan was still like coaching our kids' sports. He was still very involved. Like we never had tweakers over at our house. We never like, we weren't those, we weren't that in that we were in the throes of addiction, but not like that. We knew how to save face. We knew how to like look the part for the most part. And I don't know how we were able to still keep like that. We need to keep our kids safe mentality, because a lot of times that goes out the door, Right. And looking back, I'm like, okay, yeah, we didn't let like other addicts in our home, and we kept the like we sat at the table and ate dinner. But girl, I cannot tell you how many pills we probably lost like around our house. Like, God forbid our kids would have like grabbed one of those, they'd be dead, literally, quite literally. And smoking in our bathroom, like just because you smoke it in the bathroom, you still have that on you. I guarantee had they drug tested my babies back then, just from hugging us and cuddling us, it would have been in their system. I guarantee it.
Right.
And it's just like, I guess that's how you know you're truly in addiction. It's when you can look in your baby's eyes and they cannot save you.
Yeah.
You know? And so the tipping point was that Dan had taken, he had smoked blue, and then he had taken a Subutex, like within minutes after doing that. And it threw him into acute withdrawal, which is like horrific to watch. And his whole body was shaking. I didn't know what was going on. I was freaking out. Like my sister in law, she was a CNA, so she came rushing over and she was like checking his heart rate, his blood, like everything like that. And she was like, I don't know what's going on. Like he was just curled up in a ball, shaking uncontrollably. It was literally like every pore in his body had opened up. And it looked like somebody had taken a buckets of water and just threw it on him. Like he had just gotten out of the lake. He was drenched in sweat. Like his heart, you could feel it through his chest. And I was like, we need to call 911. I was freaking out. I was like, what did you take? Like screaming at him. His mom was freaking out. And he was able to muster up. I think I threw myself into acute withdrawal. And so we were like, I ended up started calling rehab facilities right then. And they were like, you need to get him drugs. Get him drugs, and we're going to get you guys into treatment, you know?
Right.
And so my mother-in-law gave us $350. And we went and we bought drugs. $350 worth of pills. And she kept our kids for us. That was on a Sunday. We set up rehab. We were leaving Thursday morning.
Right.
So August 4th, we were flying out. And we were going to 2 separate facilities in California. I was going to be at Windward Way in Orange Beach, California, and Daniel was going to Serenity Lodge in Lake Arrowhead, California. And my mother and father-in-law, I remember that night before we left, we laid in bed with our kids. And I was on one side, he was on the other. And we wrapped our arms around our kids and we just held hands. And I remember just like thinking, like, how did we get here, man? You know, like, how did we get here? Like, our addiction hit hard and fast for me and Dan. We hit a very low load within a very short amount of time, you know, and my poor kids, man. And we woke up that morning. We didn't wake the kids up because we didn't want them to cry. I remember we leaned over and we kissed them. And we left, and my mother-in-law and father-in-law drove us in like an hour and a half to Portland, Oregon. We were smoking pills. They were stopping us at rest stops along the way, the whole way. And smoking pills, smoking up the rest of what we had. We got to the airport. Dan still had, I believe, 8 pills in his pocket. I went through security and he sat in the airport bathroom and smoked up 8 pills. And he came through security. I don't even know how he was standing at that point. We got on our plane. I remember we just held each other like in our seats, you know, and we got off in Los Angeles. And his bride came and mine wasn't there yet. And I remember Dan was shaking so hard. And he was like, I'm scared. And he was like, I'm not leaving her until her ride gets here. I'm not going to leave my wife. He told his driver or whatever. And his driver was like, okay. And so he waited until mine got there. And I remember we hugged. And I remember as he was walking away, I turned around and I looked back at him. And I saw him for the first time, like really saw him for the first time in a really long time. And he looked so sucked up. And he looked just so like defeated. And it like hit me like, my God, I hadn't looked at him in a really long time. And like, look at like my beautiful, like 200 plus pound, like beast of a husband who used to walk around beating everybody's ass is like this frail, like, for lack of a better term, tweaker.
Yeah.
And I got mine. I went to my rehab facility. I spent hours doing the check-in process, and I was coming down and I was feeling like hell and I was pissed off and I wanted a bed. I
Yeah.
was like, get me to my room now. Um,
So I
and
bet fun cussing them out, and
oh my God, bad. Like
I've
literally
been both sides.
taking every life event that's ever happened to me and just releasing it on these poor people. And so finally they got me my bed, and I just remember just collapsing in the bed and just being like, oh my God, dude, I like, holy hell. Because I had never at that point been through withdrawal, really. Like, I'd never allowed myself to get that clean enough to where I would go through withdrawal. And off of meth, you get tired. You don't really have body withdrawals except for the tired and a lot of emotions. But this was like my first real experience with actual withdrawals from opiates, and it was hell.
Yeah.
And I refused the Valium and the Suboxone that they offered during detox because I felt like I needed to feel the pain of it, because I needed to remember when I left there how awful it was. And I felt like, in a sense, you deserve this. You did this to yourself. Now you deserve to go through it full blown, and feel it all. And so, about 3 days into detox, I started my stomach was hurting so bad. And when I went to the bathroom, it was like burning awful. And I realized that I had a bladder infection that I didn't know I had because I was so high that I couldn't feel the pain of it. And it had like traveled into my organs and stuff. And it was like, I kid you not, like I don't know if this is too much. You can cut it out if it is, but my urine was literally, girl, like brown, like dark brown. And it hurt so bad. And I had to be on antibiotics for like 2 weeks. And I just remember just sitting in the shower in rehab and just I was curled into a ball, and I was just my head down, letting the hot water hit me. And just bawling and just being at the lowest like I'd ever been.
You have no idea how many women go into treatment with so many problems down there because they haven't been like taking care of themselves or feeling it.
Yeah. Yeah. I was blown away by it. I was like, how in the heck did I not notice this? Because this is excruciating. Like, now that I'm clean, like what I just like chalked it up to, oh, I must be dehydrated. That's why my urine's so dark. Like, are you dumb? That ain't normal, girl.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I went through that. And then I started getting that like pissed off part you get in rehab where you're like, I want to go home now. Take me home. Like, I was like, every day I'd be like, I'm leaving. And they'd be like, they'd go, if you don't let me talk to my kids, I'm leaving. I would try to swindle things out of them. They were like, no, you're not doing that. I was like, yes, I am. You can't keep me. But I was always like, they'd be like, okay, well, if you want to start the process, then I'd be like, no, I can't. Like,
thank you for the story of how bratty us women are in treatment, bro.
Yes, I was not a nice person all the time. Yeah. And then I graduated out of detox. I was only in detox for about 4 or 5 days, and then I graduated out of it because I was able to get everything except for, I believe it was the fentanyl was still in my system, but I was like, my levels or whatever were going down. I was starting to wash stuff out of my system, and I hadn't taken any of the Valium. I hadn't taken any of the Suboxone. So after 4 days, I was able to move into the main house. And I'll tell you, it was shocking. Like, I was in there with lawyers, nurses, therapists, like women who, if you would have seen them on the streets, these are business women. These are upper to upper middle class, like women in there that you would never like think struggled. And they were literally like in the pits of despair.
Yeah.
In like deep, deep addiction. And I remember watching a woman come in because there was a lot of alcoholics in my rehab facility. I remember this nurse coming in, and she was an older woman, and she was so classy, and she was beautiful. And I remember watching her withdrawals, and I had never seen something so terrifying in my life. Like, the alcohol withdrawals were the most like saddest, scariest things ever. So many ambulances would come to our houses and pick them up and take them to the hospital to help them, because like they could literally die from it. Yeah. And I remember just being around that, because at that point I'd only really been around my husband and his brothers and not seen it in other people's lives, And so it was crazy seeing that. And anyways, I worked my program and stuff. And then 2 weeks in there, my mom decided that she was going to try to take custody of our kids. And so they took me aside after one of the group meetings, and they were like, your mom just filed this paperwork. She went up to your mother-in-law's with authorities. She took your babies from your mother-in-law, because we had left our babies in my mother-in-law's care. And she's trying to get custody of them. And I lost it. And they told Dan too, and he lost it. And I'm still to this day very resentful to my mom, because for a week, I believe it took away from a week of our like treatment there and stuff like that, because we were writing up statements. Because we had to do a Zoom courtroom visit a week later. Mm-hmm. And it took away from us focusing on our sobriety. It was BS for all intents and purposes. We voluntarily like admitted ourselves into rehab, like our kids were in a safe place and stuff, and it was just unnecessary. But we won. We went in. The judge told my mom to give our children back to my mother-in-law within 2 hours, or else she'd be charged with kidnapping. And he wished us like the best of luck. And it was a relief and stuff like that. And then we had only signed up for 30 days. Mm-hmm. So at that point we had about a week left, I think. But both of our rehab facilities were trying to encourage us to stay longer. You guys need longer, Right. And I was still cocky. And I was like, our addiction wasn't this bad. Like, we were not tweakers, like just still had that arrogant high, almost like, yes, I did drugs, but I was like, not that bad.
Right.
And I remember being on the phone with Dan, and I was like, like, we are not like these people and stuff like that, like telling him that. And I remember him just quietly telling me, but we are. You can't think like that, baby. You can't think like that. We are them. And I was like, okay, whatever, And then a couple of days later, he just out of nowhere was like, we're going home. Call my mom, tell her to buy us a flight. We're leaving. And the rehab facility was like, they called me in because we had gotten flights, and I was like, okay. He was getting a ride down because Arrowhead was like an hour and a half away from mine. So he was getting a taxi, driving it down to me, going to pick me up, and we were going to the airport. And my rehab facility, my patient advocate or whatever, had called me into the office, and they were like, Sarahya, he just got his, is it FMLA or something that they give you when you're in there, like his funds from being in here through his job and stuff like that. So He had gotten deposit of like $5,000. And they were like, he's going to relapse. And I remember being so offended, being like, no, he's not. Like, I cannot believe you would say that. And I remember my patient advocate, her name is Andrea, and she was like, Sarahya, I've seen this for years. She was an older woman. She was awesome. I thank God for her, like, still to this day. But she was like, he's going to relapse and he's going to die. And I was like, no, no, no. That's not the case or whatever. And I missed him, I missed him. That was the longest we'd ever been away from each other, ever. And I just wanted to see my husband, man. And so I was like, whatever. So I lied to them and I was like, I'm just going to go have lunch with him and try to convince him to come back. Well, I knew damn well I wasn't. My plane was already, like, plane ticket was bought, but I didn't have the guts to tell them because I respected these people so much to be like,
Right.
screw you, bye. So I was like, I'm just going to run away. Get out there. And I did. He came and he picked me up and he looked great. He looked awesome. Like the best I had seen him in years. He was back up to 200 plus pounds. He was tan. He had been working out while he was there at his facility. He looked great. I was like, oh my God, like he looks so healthy. He looks so good. And he was funny because so I had ended up choosing one of the only chain of rehab facilities in California state that didn't allow Suboxone. Right. So they had detoxed Dan off Suboxone, which was hell. He was in detox for 2 weeks because Suboxone seeps into your bones. Yeah. And at that point, he had been on it for like 6 years, I think 6-7 years. And he was in so much pain while he was in detox that from his trying to control his restless arms and restless legs, he was pushing down on a sink in his bathroom because we had our own private suites and stuff like that in the rehab facility. And he had ripped his sink out of the wall, like actually ripped it out of the wall from shaking and holding it so hard. And I got his journal after he passed and he wrote all about it, just the pain and like the panic attacks and everything that he went through to get clean like that, and so he looked awesome. And he was like, I will say for those few days, for about 24 hours, I met Dan for the very first time. And he was funny and he was like witty and he was cocky and he was like, I was like, I thought back a lot and I was like, I would have loved him. I think, like that Dan, that new version of Dan, I wish I could have like known him longer, and I wish he would have like seen what he was seeing. Mm-hmm. And so we got on our plane and we were so hopeful, like for our future and stuff. And we arrived home on the 26th of August. We had went to treatment August 4th, arrived home on the 26th. And we got picked up from the airport at about 1 a.m. on the 27th, I guess you could say, that Saturday morning at 1 a.m. from my sister-in-law. And something changed in Dan when we arrived back to Washington State off of that plane. And I saw it. He was very sad, very, very sad. And I remember we were driving home from Portland and I had my head in his lap and he was listening to Something in the Orange by Zach Bryan. Mm-hmm. And he was just looking down at me and he was just bawling, just silently bawling, just tears were running down his face. And I just kept wiping his face and whispering like, what's wrong? And he just like shook his head and just cried. And we got home, we went to bed, and then we saw our kids the next day. We surprised them. And they came running into my mother-in-law's bedroom and they stopped dead in their tracks. And they just started bawling. And they jumped into our arms and Dan was crying and he was holding them and he just kept saying, I'm so sorry. You guys are enough. You've always been enough. You've always been enough. It was never about you. It's never about you. And I remember my little girl wrapping her arms around her daddy's neck. And she grabbed his face with her little hands. And she said, I'm so glad you're better, Daddy. I'm so glad you got better. And my husband was like, never again, you guys, I promise, like, never again. Daddy's good, daddy's clean and stuff. And it was beautiful, you know, and we spent time with them. And we were living in a motorhome at that time because our plan before we went to treatment was we were trying to build a home on some property. And so we moved back into our motorhome on my in-laws' property. Uh, and my mother-in-law had cleaned out everything while we were in treatment. She'd gotten rid of all drug paraphernalia, like thrown everything out, like cleaned everything. And I was vacuuming. I was going over everything one more time as we were moving our stuff back into there and stuff. And a pair of Dan's socks fell off of um, the little couch in the motorhome, and it rolled up under this like ledge thing that was in there. And Dan reached down to grab the socks. And now, mind you, I had vacuumed over this spot 3 times already. And there was a blue right there. And I remember he picked it up off of the ground. Like, it is like a freak accident that he found this. I'm not kidding. Like, he grabbed it, and I remember we locked eyes. And I just shook my head and I said, throw it away. And he was like, you don't think we should try it? And I was like, just throw it away. And he sat it in our closet. I remember he looked at it for a little longer, and he just sat it up in our closet. And he stewed on it. And he let it sit, and he let the idea marinate. And he said it's probably a bunk one anyways, because sometimes you would get them and they wouldn't care. They would be bunk. They would have like hardly no fentanyl in it. It wouldn't get you high or anything. And so it's probably one of the bunk ones. Let's just try it. And I was like, whatever, Dan. And I remember he took a hit of it, and then he handed it to me, and I took a hit of it. And I was like, it's bunk. And it did nothing to me. And I looked at him, and he was nodding out. And I was like, how? Like, I just smoked off the same pill as you. Like, you were smoking 40 to 50 pills a day before we went to treatment. I was smoking 3. There's nothing in this, I promise you. And he was just like nodded out. And I was like, I don't want that. Like, it doesn't even do anything to me. It's gross. And he finished that or whatever. And he was like, that was, and then once he came back to, you know, he was like, that was so stupid. Like, we're never doing that again. That's stupid. I was like, yeah, that was stupid. Like, what, you know? And so we went into the house, and then we were looking up meetings. We were like, we got to go to meetings tomorrow, Sunday. And we found one that had a W in front of it. Well, we thought that meant like everyone's welcome, like welcome, not women. Oh,
Okay.
we get ready on Sunday, and we go to our welcome meeting and realize that it's just for women. And so we're like, oh my God, like, we're idiots, obviously. So we're like, okay, whatever. We'll just go to another one later on in the week. It'll be fine. So we leave there and everything like that. And we get another deposit that we weren't supposed to get until Thursday or Friday of like another $5,000. And Dan's like, we're driving home from Olympia to Elma where we live. And we're like, Dan's like, should we get 2 pills just as like a last goodbye, like our last hoorah or whatever? And I was like, why? Like, that's so stupid. Why? And he's like, I don't know. Don't you think like it'd be kind of like fun one more time just to do it for old time's sake or whatever? And I was like, dude, whatever. Because at this point, I truly didn't have the fight in me to fight him. at this point, it was like, we've been through rehab. Like, I'm tired, man.
Right.
Like, you're gonna do what you're gonna do, you know? And so we stopped at one of our old dealers' places, and Daniel went inside. And I remember the guy looking at us, and even strung out, he was like, "What are you doing here?" And he's like, "Dan, you look great, man. Like, what are you even doing here?" And Dan was like, "Just me and my old lady want to do like one more last hoorah, one more time, whatever." And he was like, "Are you sure, man? You look really good. You look healthy. Are you sure?" And Dan's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "All right, dude." And so Dan ended up buying 4 pills from him. And I was like, "No, we're not doing it. We're not doing 4. Like, you said 1 and 1. We're not going to do 4. It's just stupid logic, whatever. Like it mattered at that point." And so I made him throw the other 2 out the window. And he was like, "Ugh." But he threw them out, and we went home. And again, they did nothing to me. I was like, I don't feel it. I don't understand. And again, he was laid out. And I didn't understand it. And again, when he came to, he was like, "That was stupid." Well, he started work back up that Monday. So he was like, "I'm starting work. Like, this is dumb. This is over with, So I was like, okay, we were hopeful, whatever. He went to work that day, came back. He seemed awesome, but he was still so sad. And he had told me, he said, "I want you to listen to this song. Put these headphones on. I don't want our kids to hear it, but listen to this song. This is how I feel." And I put it on, and it was called Popular Monster by Falling in Reverse. And it was like one of the darkest, saddest songs I'd ever heard. And it was literally just about how, like, I look this, like, a certain way on the outside, but nobody knows, like, I'm dying inside. And, like, I'm fighting these demons. And, like, the only way they're going to shut up is when I'm in a casket, basically. And I remember I took off the headphones, and I was like, "Damn, that is, like, so sad. Like, what in the world? Like,
Right.
It's so dark, And he was like, "I know, it's just how I felt," or whatever. And then, ironically enough, again, we ended up watching, it was called The Best Graduation Speech of All Times. And it was a African-American gentleman giving a speech about, like, how his dad taught him to be a servant, and to give, and to, like, always give back and hold your head up high. And on that video, that YouTube video, he tells the story about how his wife died and how he stood at his wife's casket with his 2 little boys, the love of his life and stuff, and just how that rocked him. And I remember looking at Dan and being like, "Could you imagine?" And I hugged him super tight, and I was like, "Oh, I could not handle, like, not having you. That'd be so sad." And I was kind of crying, and I was like, "I love you so much," and stuff. And he was like, "Yeah, that would be awful." And I remember he shook his head. Well, one of our old dealers, she was a girl. She ended up calling his phone that night. And it was actually because my kids had their dad's phone, and they were making prank calls, and they just so happened to dial her number and do a prank call and hang up. And so she was calling back, and my husband answered. And she told him, "I got these blues. But they're mega blues. They're the strongest strand we've ever had. Like, you've got to try them." And she convinced him to try them, And he came in to our little trailer. I just gotten out of the shower, and I was sitting there, and he was like, "I'm going to go. Nicole called me. I'm going to go, and I'm going to get some blues." And I remember I just put my head down, and I just started crying. And I was like, it's going back to how it was. And I was like, "I'm going to lose you, Dan. I'm going to lose you this time for good." He was like, "No, you won't. I promise you won't." And he was tying his shoes, and he looked up at me, And we locked eyes, and he was like, if you tell me not to go, I won't do it. All you have to do is tell me not to go. But we had just gotten out of treatment, and it had really been drilled into me, like, you can't save him, you can't save anybody. That has to be a choice they make themselves.
Right.
And so I just put my head down and I said, I can't make that choice for you. You know I can't. I can't tell you not to go. You have to do that on your own. And he sat there for a few minutes and he put his head down and he started tying his shoe again. And he said, I'll be right back, baby. I promise it'll be the last. And he left and he came back a few hours later. He walked up to his mom. Me and his mom were sitting in the garden. And he gave his mom a hug. And he told my mother-in-law, because my brother-in-law, the one that I told you was steeped in addiction as well, he was in jail. And my other brother-in-laws had been working on their sobriety from alcoholism and stuff. And so he gave his mom a hug and he told her, Mama, all your boys are sober tonight. You can finally sleep and rest your head. None of your boys are going to die tonight. And my mother-in-law gave him a hug, and that was the last thing he ever said to her. And we went inside of our trailer, and he started smoking a blue, and he stopped and he went to tuck our kids in for bed, and he went to give our little boy a hug. And my little boy, and he jumped up and he said, you did it again. So he could smell it on his dad's breath.
Oh.
And my husband said, no, I didn't, buddy. He said, I could smell it, Dad. Yes, you did. You did it again. And he's freaking out. Why would you do that? We're going to get taken from you. Why would you do that? And my husband told him, you're going to have to trust me, buddy. I know I lost your trust. Now, mind you, he's full-blown lying to our kid, obviously, right? At that. He says, you're going to have to trust me, buddy. I promise. We're not going back to that. And my little boy refused to give his dad a hug or a kiss. Said, no, I know you did. You're lying, whatever. And my boy fell asleep mad. And Daniel came back to our room and he began to smoke again, and he started overdosing right in front of me. And I had a glass of ice water and I threw it in his face. And I actually socked him because I was like, come to, like, what the hell is going on? I'd never really seen that happen to him. I was freaking out. And he started shaking. He was like, what the hell? Like, calm down. You're scaring me. He came to, and I grabbed the pills from him, and I grabbed the tutor, and I grabbed the foil, and I destroyed it. I ran it down our sink, the pills down our sink. I ripped the foil up and the tutor, and I threw it all away. And I was like, you're gonna die. I was screaming at him. And I was like, I'm not going to watch you die. Like, no. He was like, okay, you're right. And so we went outside and we sat on my car for about 2 hours. And I can't remember what we talked about. I just remember he held me, and I remember looking up at the stars. And then we came in and we went to bed, and I fell asleep, and I woke up to his alarm at like 4:30 in the morning. And I remember I looked up and he was just looking at me, and he said, I never slept last night. I just watched you. You're so beautiful. I love you so much. And I was like, okay, I love you too. And we got up, started getting ready. And for some reason, I baked him, let me make you breakfast this morning. Have breakfast with me. And he was like, I'm running late. I'm going to be late. And I was like, please just let me make you breakfast. And he said, oh, what the hell? I'm already late. All right, I'll have breakfast with you. And so I made him breakfast, and he ate with me. And he went to go leave for work. And I remember he popped his head back in our doorway. And he had his cocky little grin on his face. And he said, I'll see you tonight, baby girl. I love you. And he said, and hey, I hid one pill from you. I'm going to do it tonight after work on the job site. And then I'm going to be done for good. Okay. And I shook my head and I said, don't do it. Because my brother and his little brother worked Dan was their boss on that job site. And I said, Sam and Jacob are going to know. Don't do it. Like, just don't do it. What's one more time? And he said, they won't. I'll wait till they leave. I promise. And then when on like, this is my resolve. Like, I'm done after that. When I step back foot in this house, you'll never have to worry about it again. And he left for work. And he died 4 hours later. And he was right. He never did it again. He entered a porta potty on his job site at about 7:15 that morning. And he began to smoke a pill. And they waited 40 minutes before they beat down the door and dragged him out. And they Narcaned him 3 times. And they worked on him for over an hour. They did the paddles on him. But he was pronounced dead at 8:07 a.m. And at 8:07 a.m., I woke up and I sent him a text that said, I love you. I am yours and you are mine. And I never seen my husband again. And my little boy woke up to the news that after not giving his daddy a hug or kiss the night before, that your daddy is gone. And
so is that when have you stayed clean since then?
yes, that was the like best and worst day of my life. That is the day that I made a resolve with myself that I would never again. And the day I lost him, obviously, it was almost, you could look at it as like Daniel's last act of love. He saved my life by giving his, which really, obviously, like, it's not what he wanted. It's not what I wanted, but it's what happened. And it's a tragedy, but there is beauty in tragedy sometimes as well, you know?
Right. And just because I know you and I've talked to you, I know that you have a lot of guilt around what happened.
Massive. Yeah.
And how have you been dealing with that?
I don't. I just can't bury it. Like, I don't. I know for my sobriety's sake, I'm going to have to address that, or else eventually I imagine it will drag me back down to my addiction. I'll, you know, like, you can only fester that for so long before you want to numb that. So I'm very aware of it, and I'm actually supposed to be starting counseling specifically for that within the next week or two. So I'm hoping that I come to some place of peace with it. I'm not sure how you do that. Like, how do you do that? A life was lost and you played a role in it, you know? Like, yes, Daniel had a choice, but I also, like, I watched my husband struggle for years and I still chose to take that leap into addiction. Like, how do you not, you know? How do I not always think of the what ifs? Like, what if I would have told him, no, please don't go that night? You know, like, would he have never went? You know, like, I don't know. I
Think there's always going to be what ifs, but one thing that I find super like beautiful about you is the fact that you tell your story. And I've watched you write. It makes me emotional even thinking about it. I've watched you write about you and Daniel for like the last 6 months, and really it is a beautiful tribute to him and to your children. And it's hard, girl, because addiction, alcoholism, there really isn't sometimes a good or a bad. There just is, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of guilt. There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of guilt and shame in my story, and nobody died, right? But I hurt a lot of people. And I think that no matter where you sit in addiction, alcoholism, you end up with a hell of a lot of guilt and shame. And I believe with my whole little heart that he's looking down on you guys and super proud of you for being sober and for being the mom that maybe you couldn't be at that time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think that's probably like where a lot of my guilt lies also, is like one day I will have to tell my children my part in their father's addiction and how I used with him until the day he died. And I just hope they offer me mercy when that day comes, you know? But like how, like looking in their eyes is probably what gets me the most, because that's a pain. Like as a mom, you want to take away your kids' pain, right?
Yeah.
Like there's always like a solution. Well, I don't have a solution for that, you know? Like I can't bring daddy back.
Right.
Like he's not coming back, you know? And yeah, it's a mess. My grief journey, my sobriety, I'm doing great, girl. My grief journey is not the best.
Yeah. Not, so if there was anything that you could tell people about addiction, about, your journey and what you've learned, what would it be?
Just if you've never been there, don't judge it, man. And you do not know. Like, for one, some of the most beautiful people I know are recovering addicts and alcoholics, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know the pain or what got them there, what injury, what prescription, what doctor, what professional led them into their addiction, you know. Just man, just be nice. Like don't sit on your soapbox as you overeat and you do your scratch tickets and everything else and look down on us, you know, because society has put a stigma, you know, like just like offer mercy and grace where you can. And if you've never been there, don't try it. Like it's not worth it. It's not a fun party drug. Like none of it is. Not coke, not meth, not heroin. None of it's a fun party drug. Like addiction, you use it to try to take away pain, and it normally causes more pain than you ever had before, you know?
Right.
And it will take you to places you never intended on going.
Right.
So just don't go there. And if you are in throes of addiction, like, man, like there is always hope. Like there is always hope, you know? And I know it seems dark right now and you're fighting. But I promise, like if you'll reach out, and it's scary, it's so scary to reach out. I know that because of the stigma surrounding it. But if you'll just reach out, you will find your people, you know? Like, and your life still holds so much value, and you are still like worth so much. You always have been, like, and restoration and redemption will find you even in like the biggest tragedies, you know? And if I can do it, there's nothing so hopeless about you that you can't do it.
Well, thank you so much for coming and telling us your story.